Assalamu alaikum. Ready?
Yes.
Okay, so how was the food? I think it was too good to be bad, wasn't it? Which means it's too good, you ate too much, now it's bad, you're going to fall asleep. You fell asleep, right?
You're right.
So that's why Koan is too good to be bad. So again, well, I know that because of trip and because of the food that you really might struggling, but hopefully we'll try to keep you awake. Life is short, right? Okay, so what I want to do, I want to really do a quick kind of overview of the book that I mentioned to you, the teacher guide book that I mentioned, alhamdulillah, was the fruit of the summer, 2 months. So I will share to you what is there, and we'll share with you the PDF version of this as a manuscript that is not published yet. So we call it 5D Thinking for Transformative Teaching. So it will be published under our institute. The part 1 is we call the knowledge problem or learn ignorance. Okay, so we think there's a, the problem is the knowledge. And that is actually in one way to say learn ignorance, that through education that we are basically provided a very interesting type of ignorance that we don't know but we think we know. That is actually even more ignorance than the regular default ignorance. So in this section we discuss the core problem, the root cause of the problem, the separation of creation and creator. So this is essentially all around diagnosing the problem. What is the real core? What is the real problem? Because most of the time, if you ask what is the problem, they will say, "Oh, it's evolution," or "Is it?" We think evolution is a symptom, is not the problem, is not the virus. The core is way different. So we try to address the core problem or diagnose the virus that's causing the problem. Because remember, for a long time, humanity had no idea of bacteria and virus. Until we discovered that actually virus and bacteria are the one that causing disease. So we think that similarly, a lot of problem that we experience is because of certain invisible virus that's basically intentionally provided to us through education. So we try to identify what it is and how we can diagnose the problem. That's the first part. Okay. So the second part is talking about the solution. So the suggestion is to establish a new worldview based on the maqasid al-Quran, not maqasid al-Sharia. It's very big differences. Okay. So in this case, that when you look at the Quran, the maqasid al-Quran, the essential part is tawheed. So therefore, we call this tawheedi worldview. So it's how can we establish Tawheedi worldview, and how the Quran actually proposed such worldview, and how the Prophet implemented that, and what are in the Sunnah that we do is very much intended to establish the worldview. But over time, since we just forget the meaning and reduce the ritual, that it seems like the word is there but the meaning is lost. So we try to rediscover and see how we can rebuild the Tawheedi worldview. And the third one is a theoretical framework on certain issue. The first one is about the self. How are we supposed to understand the self? The common one in secular is a self-determination theory. We came up with the self-realization theory, and we compare them. And then we here discuss the element of human nature, and particularly the creation we call occasionalism, in which that every moment directly created by God. So we have some discussion here on evolution as well. You can see, but essentially after all these things, it's just as a one short discussion, because it's just showing that this can be answered once you really establish the worldview. You can easily find the answer to such question as well. Part 4 about transformation and holistic education. So in this case, that we present what is the understanding of human being in Islam, and what are the pillar of educational paradigms that within the Tawhidi worldview. And again, then we discuss the holistic and integrative approach to education, discuss the mission of schooling, role of teachers, the pillars of Islamic characters, and how to infuse this into education. So again, and then we had some discussion on the science as well. And the chapter 5 talks about 5D thinking model for knowledge integration as a method to integrate that. So why thinking, why 5D thinking, what are the dimensions, and how it's linked to the kalima shahada. We link directly to the kalima tawheed. And then who are the audience, and how it can be applied to other fields beside the physical science as well. Because it's not only physical science, everything could be in this case, consider ayah within this model, okay? So teaching objective and how to teach in human and social science and expected outcome of the model. And then we add 3 topics as an example of how we apply the 5D thinking. We show 3 topics as a kind of showcase that how the model is implemented. Finally, we call transformation teaching methods that I mentioned, that Triple H model. So in this case, we explain what are the teaching methods and how we can teach the subject, 5D thinking through effective teaching, okay? So what we're going to do, we will share with you the manuscript, and also most of those, as I mentioned, we will cover most of them throughout our lectures during the 6 days, in my hours, my sessions. And also, we are planning to have structured training, professional development training with 6 modules for each part of them. So, and with assessment as well, which basically means that if you go through them and you take assessment, you pass at least 70, which means that you really master this one. And if you finish all, that we can certify you, say you really know what is the model and how you can go and implement in classrooms. That's also our objective anyway, that we want to really use this as a kind of training, a training book in this regard. Okay, so this is just a brief information. Let's see, we move to the, okay, so this is our slide, our topic, very first one. So, okay, so we're going to, as I mentioned, I think you learn a lot. I wish you had more time with Dr. Yunus. So he's really, really very good in identifying some problem in modern science. But we're going to talk more about science, scientism, and the problem in science particularly, and in knowledge in general, okay? So essentially, we're going to look at science, existence, and God, and to see what is the problem, how we can identify. Now, I will share some data, and we'll have some, discussion on that. I call basically, I always start with some brain exercise, but given the class size here, so we need to limit, like maybe when I will ask, a view of 3-4 people and have to move on. Otherwise, we spend all the time on the discussion section. Here is the very first thing I want you to think about and tell me what you think. This is the 2 different view of 2 scientists. One he passed away, I think, like a few years ago, Stephen Hawking, and the other was the head of NIH in US for a very long time. Now, Hawking says, before we understood science, it was natural to believe that God created the universe, but now science offers a more convincing explanation. Okay? And Francis Collins says, the God of the Bible is also the God of genome. He was the head of the Human Genome Projects. God can be found in cathedral or in the lab. Okay. Now a question here: who is right and wrong? I know that will be your answer. But who is the dominant voice today in science? Yes.
Do not know.
Huh? Stephen Hawking. What is his point? What he's trying to say?
You're basically saying that the explanation that science has now, I don't need the concept of God. The explanation of science can kind of fill in. I get a better explanation through science than through the traditional approach.
So, which kind of God he has in mind in this case? Stephen Hawking. Which kind of God he has in mind that he thinks is not needed anymore?
Because he doesn't see it as a creator.
Yeah, but which kind of God that he has in mind? He has the God of what they call God of gap. The God of gap basically says that, like when you try and look at something, if you cannot explain it, there is a gap there, then you can ascribe to God. You can say, we can understand how the life emerged. Oh, God maybe created the life because you cannot explain. But his point here, now we have an explanation, and science does provide explanation, therefore it doesn't make sense try to explain or understand something through God. Now, yes?
He's also alluding that ignorance would believe in God. Like, he's saying that at a time where there was ignorance, we didn't have the knowledge.
Exactly.
It means that's why you guys, like, alluding religion.
Very, very true. So he's saying that, we are enlightened now, we are educated now, You get your PhD, you go to Harvard, it's not, for those ignorant people, it's fine to believe in God, but for those educated people, it's shame to believe in God. Why? Because science can explain everything, right?
Yeah.
So, but do you think that science can explain everything, or something, or nothing?
Something. Science can explain something, not everything, but it can give maybe scientific theories to be tested.
What can science explain to us?
Science can explain what?
Can I say one?
Science can explain what?
So, an easy example is like, I really want to know about water, and I'm ignorant. So what can I learn through science about the water?
It's made up of hydrogen atoms.
Properties
Maybe
of water.
Okay.
The why.
So can science really explain my question if I say, what is this?
Yes.
Can say?
Yes.
And it will say, okay, name it. And then it says, this is something consists of hydrogen and oxygen, right? So, but if I say, how this come into existence? Can science explain that?
No.
How water actually comes into existence? Can science explain that?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes. Yes.
Really?
Yes, it came out to say, it says science says water came to Earth through meteorite, a shower of meteorites. And they have the evidence for that.
Okay.
But then the showers are made from that cycle, right? So
the only thing science can explain is why water exists.
So the science can answer how question as well, but cannot answer why question. Let's see. Yeah, well, I think we'll have after that. We're going to have this question. So the question is actually, we'll come to this one. Keep in mind, basically, the argument that Hawking has. If science can explain everything, his point is you don't need God. Now then we need to first ask to see what really science can explain and what it cannot explain. Okay? So in a way that you see, he's basically saying that, we have a concept of God because we don't understand some things. And once we understand it, then no need God. Why? Because the explanation, what he means here, is tells you about the source. What is the source of water? How it comes into existence. He says, we know that. What is the water? We can explain that. So his argument is that the science can answer to all of your questions. But let's say my three questions, what, how, and why. The science will say water consists of hydrogen and oxygen. The science will say water is made when two hydrogen and one oxygen come together in a particular way. The science will say it was just luck and, through the evolutionary process that ultimately you find, let's say, water and then the water becomes the source of life. So in other words, you have to bring the luck factor there to explain it, because there is no purpose. You are not supposed to mention it was intentionally made in that way. So essentially, how did we get water and how we get the life? It was just out of billions of billion possibility after the big explosion. Luckily, that we get basically, right condition in which that we get one element they call water, and that becomes the source for life. That again after many, again other lucks as well. So in a way, you can see the lady luck is there. It has to be there. So you can't really explain it without that, okay? Now, what I call it is essentially this scientific idea is the greatest danger now for the entire humanity. So we just got out of the COVID-19. We have very good idea of what was the danger. But I think the virus that is spreading around the world is 1,000 times more dangerous than the coronavirus, because it's killing the eternal life of people. It's turning them to another species, okay? So that virus, essentially causing deism or atheism, is rooted very much in a way that we understand the creation. We understand, in this case, the beings out there. I want to just get you through certain data. Now look at here. This is on the very left side. They ask question. This is Pew Research Center asking question to different people to see whether they think there is a conflict between science and religion. What you see on the left side, the answer from Muslims. On the very right side, on the middle and the right side is mostly non-Muslims. So what do you see the difference in their answer? Who thinks there is more conflict between science and religion? Muslims or non-Muslims? Non-Muslims think there is actually more conflict. Muslim is actually more fine with science. They are not actually thinking there is any problem. And that is actually a bigger problem. Which means that because Christians and Jews and others, they think because there is a very clear conflict between science and their belief. But for Muslims, it seems as if science is perfectly fine. So therefore, most Muslims think that there is really no issue with science. And when they do the survey, it's very clearly reflected in the surveys that for most Muslim science is not a problem. Therefore, they have no issue to send their kids to the schools.
I think there's a reason for that, why Muslims think there's no conflict between science and Islam. And that's deeply rooted in the scientific information, the Quran, and the science that took place in Baghdad and in Spain. I think that's where the thinking of the Muslims.
But modern science is very different. To not understand the difference between Islamic science, the science with Muslim versus modern science itself is a big problem. Because go and read like a scholar like Sayyid Hussein Nasr. He'll tell you that how Muslim used to do science and what was it, the way they explain it, versus how we do science in modern times. It has absolutely nothing to do with each other. If you look at the perspective in which they present science, the subject was same. They were studying chemistry, biology, maths, same as is. They were leading in the world, but the way they would present, God were everywhere.
Yes.
So, but in the way that we present, God is nowhere.
Most of our, correct me if I'm wrong, but most of our Islamic scientists were actually scholars first, before they became scientists.
Sure.
That is basically the natural inclination of getting and investigating the Quran that led them to all of these scientific. So there's a very big difference. Like you said, it's a very dangerous one, because right now, as you're pointing out, when the Islamic world thinks it's okay to send our kids to science, but they don't realize what science is teaching them and indoctrinating those kids. I think that's where we're going.
And let's see what happened with Western science. So you can see here, basically, this is for US adults. See, when they have science education, and see what happened. General publics, 83% believe in God. Scientists, only 33% believe in God. You can see the differences, the gap between the two. Essentially, it's very, very clear. As you are educated, you find Hawking is right, you find no room to believe in God, okay? Because it just doesn't make sense to you to believe in God. But for Muslim world, it was opposite actually. for the Muslim world, when in the golden age of Islam, it was different. So again, you can see here, this is the, among general public at the top, scientists at the bottom. So you see the general public, atheist, agnostic is negligible, 2%. But scientists, 17%, 11%, 20%. So you can see that basically it's very clear. Science takes away people from God, okay? And this is, again, you can look at in terms of difference between man and woman. Who is more likely to be atheist? Man or woman? Man is more likely to be atheist. This is why. When they go through the same education. So it's really interesting, isn't it? Why?
Because women are more spiritual.
See, exactly. I think there's something in the fitra of women that basically, it seems like guide them, help them to recognize the truth more than man. So, and it's very obvious. They go through the same. You can see for actually, look, the percentage of men, atheists 44%. Woman, 36%. It's a substantial, it's not 2-3%. And you cannot claim there's no differences. Essentially, those people, adults in the same country. So you cannot assume that there will be differences between them. So it's really interesting. But also you see, as they get older, what happened? When you're young, 32% are atheists. When you're 65 above, 48% are atheists. You see that? Which means as they get older and older, they learn more and more, they actually gave up the faith. So it's normally should be opposite, isn't it? That as you get older, you're supposed to really come to your sense and ask big question and basically think more toward the akhirah. But it seems like it's just opposite here. Okay? And this is, when you look at overall, essentially you can see the second largest religion now. What is the second largest one? As the second largest one is actually, if you look at it, it's agnostic and atheist in most places. So which means that if you really look at the country in terms of what is the second largest denominator for the faith or lack of faith, so you find out the agnosticism or atheism is really rising. In Europe, in most countries, I think it's now at about 50%. Now remember, US, I guess Canada as well, is substantially different than Europe in the sense that because freedom in Europe is actually freedom from religion. Freedom in US, freedom for religion. Because those who migrated to US, they essentially migrated for the sake of freely practicing their religion. But means that people in US are supposed to be way more religious. But you can see they cannot also survive with this, tsunami of atheism. So against that is all, now atheism is not just, it's actually a rising movement around the world, and to the level, this is what they did it in UK. So they're promoting that, and again you can see there is probably no God. Now stop worrying and enjoy your life. So this is actually, this is a message they are really promoting. Because the idea is that religion is restricting you, free yourself to gain your freedom and enjoy your life. Okay? So, and I think in this regard it is so what we see, this is one of really great book that's written by former dean of Harvard College. The book called Excellence Without Soul. So essentially excellence without souls, I say this is the description for robots. He's saying that, look, we are educating people. They are excellent in their, let's say, technical skill, quantitative skill, but they have no soul, which means they are robots. Remember, we tried to make argument that this is an AI, that we turn to robots. That's exactly what he's saying. He's saying that we are educating people, but they don't have any characters. They don't have any human, human side. So they are very good, very productive, could do the job, but the robots could do the same things. So, and in this regard, this is really the main problem. Again, that's what we call really the dangerous virus of deism and atheism. Okay? Okay, any questions, any comments on this part? Yes?
I'm a little bit worried because of this Islam and science thing, and in trying to convince Muslims that there is a big difference between Islam and science. Will it not lead to Muslims abandoning the study of science as it happened after Baghdad, and the same thing, Muslims left knowledge seeking or knowledge in science and focused only on Tawheed. And so the West came, after Spain came and caught up and surpassed Islam. So that was my concern. Because right now, most Muslims believe that there's a comparison, or there's an agreement between Islam and science. But the clarification, Islam that was focused on with Tawheed, and today it's Islam without Tawheed. I think that's just my concern.
So again, your concern is like we might become like more religious and less scientific?
It's just, my concern is if we can package it to that. There's no problem you following science, but it is science that believes in Allah, as against science the way it's taught.
Correct. Actually, you will see our argument here, as we approach the science through Tawhidi perspective, we will see science as a science of God. If we see the science as a study of the science of God, so we should have even more enthusiasm to study science. So in other words, we are not really, our aim is not to, in a sense that to really tell people to be anti-science. We actually, it's just opposite. We want them to be pro-science, but with one big caveat. They should be aware of the embedded ideology. So what we say is all about embedded ideology within science. It has nothing to do what we call it pure science. The problem is the science is not pure, or science is not neutral, or science is not objective. Those are just fancy words they use to deceive the mass, okay? So, and therefore when we refer it, we call secular science sometimes, or we call materialistic ideology embedded in science, but your concern is valid one. We try to be careful that we do not give impression as if we are anti-science. So we try to say it's all ideology embedded in the science. Okay, now here is the question. If science is causing such problem, what is wrong with the science that's causing this problem? So the data clearly shows, as you study science, that you're likely to lose your faith. The data clearly shows that basically as you get older, that you're likely to lose your faith with this education. But also, historically speaking, when Muslims were doing science, it was not the case. It was opposite. Well, what is wrong with the modern science that caused this problem and caused people to lose their faith?
It's that separation from creation, creator.
So that's separation. That's separation. Okay. Now look at this. That's one of, again, another brain exercise. This is from Bertrand Russell. Have you read or heard this guy? British guy, right? Philosopher and mathematician. Okay? So this guy, he had actually a famous an idea and speculation analogy, and he deceived many people with it. He said, believing in God, it's like believing there is a teapot in the solar system circling around the earth. He says you can neither prove it nor disprove it. So the best you could be agnostic. Say, I don't know. He says, as a scientist, that we, when come to God, since we cannot prove it observationally or experimentally, the best position we can take it is just to be agnostic, the best. But those who want to believe is their choice. This is just, in other words, believing in God is just a personal, subjective judgment. It cannot be objectively proven, and since science is about the objective, evidence-based idea, this cannot be subject for science. What do you think wrong with that? And therefore, look at it, says, I am a little teapot steaming and hot, I'm orbiting the sun, try and prove that I am not. You can't prove it, yes.
The essential problem in science is basically the assumption, right? Like, for example, everything goes back to the theory of evolution, right? Because to say that all of this exists without a creator, right? You're first kind of brainwashing a person to say, okay, there's no creator. And then they fill in the gaps with Mother Nature and stuff like that. So once they cut that off, now, so they're really going, like when you said in the morning, right? The science part, which is proof, right? Okay, there's water, how do you prove it? Stuff like that. The proof part you can do. But the actual creativity, how did it get created in the first place? That's the question, they dodge that question.
But do you think that belief in God is like believing in a teapot in a solar system?
No. I mean,
which cannot be proven?
no,
Empirically and experimentally?
No.
How would you prove it?
Okay,
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Actually, like, I'm taking a complete class in Canada, and what we turn the table around. So instead of I have to prove that this that it's there or it's not there, you have to prove the opposite one.
Yeah, that's why he says. That's why he says. Try and prove that I am not, which is exactly your argument.
No.
Which means that you cannot prove it is not there.
No, but I want him to prove that. You turn the table and he said, I want to be... Like, I want you to prove for me that you are there. Give me the evidence that this teapot is orbiting around the sun. And instead of me proving the point that you are making, no, you have to prove your point to me.
Okay, but they say that if you believe in God now, you have to prove the existence of God to me, right?
Why they don't have to prove that there is no God?
I see.
So,
okay.
well,
but they say we can't. That you can't as well. We both are agnostic. They will say.
No,
yes.
Yes. These are essentially false debates,
okay,
and
why?
that's what Dawkins says as well. He says it's like believing in a fairy. I can neither prove it or disprove it. But from a Quranic perspective, it's quite easy to actually prove from a causation perspective.
Okay.
And that's what it's hopefully that you're going to actually establish. From a contingency perspective, the universe is contingent. Everything within the universe is contingent. Now you use science in order to verify the contingency of that. That contingency must then depend upon a non-contingent being, which we call the necessary being. Because contingency cannot go for infinity. And you cannot have infinite regress in actuality. So therefore, when you talk about science, science is more about understanding the pattern that arises within the universe. When you talk about the cause and effect, there is a difference between cause and effect, and you said that God is not the first mover, that he just doesn't turn the key and then move it forward. So we need to go onto the front foot. We can't say, well, no, you prove to me that there is a fairy, right? From an Islamic perspective and from a historical perspective, the position of God has been clear since time immemorial. And I think what would have been helpful is that you should do a genealogy of atheism. I mean, how did it move from a Christian perspective to an atheistic perspective? I mean, Christianity has all sorts of problems because Christianity believes in this supernatural God that who only intervenes. So from a causation, on the argument of the contingency perspective, that is a very watertight argument for proving the existence of God, because that is in a sense.
But is that proof for the existence of God as the first cause?
No, as the necessary being.
As the necessary being for the beginning?
As the necessary being for all contingent causes. All right. So from a kalam perspective, we're not Christians. Christians believe, St. Thomas Aquinas believes, in the actual first cause and the first mover, and then the world runs on its own.
So in other words, so again, so you're saying that from, you know, if we look at the Islamic tradition, we could actually find a strong argument to prove
A waterproof argument.
To prove. So then what would be your analogy to show the falsehood in his analogy? What would be your analogy for the God that you have in your mind, replacing the analogy of Bertrand Russell here?
Yeah.
So instead of the teapot, what would you say for the God?
So he's using false arguments,
okay.
Right? So that's what I'm saying is that the underlying premise when we have a look at everything in the universe is contingent. Okay. And but by its contingency, I mean it is in need.
No, we get that one. Yeah. Very, very clear.
All right. So therefore, how do you explain the contingency of the universe?
Without creating.
And so the only way that you can explain the contingency of the universe is to explain it by a non-contingent being. So you arrive at a non-contingent being in order to explain the contingency of the universe. Then you also have to say, well, that non-contingent being, then you have a look at the design argument, not for the designer, but the design argument is that God can make all of this different design variety. He can make all of the animals, he can make all of the species, he can make the trees, he can make me and you different, even though we're very similar. All right? He does all of that, and that shows his will, intention, and power, and knowledge. So all of the things that Dr. Yunus was talking about in the morning, that these things needed to have intent, power, will, intentionality.
Very good.
All right. So God actually has. So the argument from an Islamic perspective is waterproof. We've lost our ability to do logic.
The reason
and reasoning.
The reason I think, because I think if I ask even some, maybe they will have difficulty to say, what does contingency mean? So we have to bring those concepts to the level of students that without really referring any philosophical term, that we should be able to explain to them. So in a way that it should be really analogously, very simple one. My question to you, you're a teacher all, analogy is very essential. Give me, if his idea is false, give me a simple analogy in which that the argument you make could be actually made to the first grader to say, look, you know, this is what does it mean to believe in God from Islamic perspective, not what Russell claims. What will be your what will be your analogy for that? And yes,
God is not confined by space; it's not material, and this. Well, the teapot it's material. Okay.
But I know, but analogy is just for sake of making complex things easy. Yeah, it's not like, it doesn't have to be one-to-one accurate things. Here is the analogy Nursi provides. This is Nursi's response to Russell. He says that believing in God is like believing in the existence of the sun in the daytime at noon when there is no cloud out there. He says, unless you're blind or willingly blindfold yourself, there's no way for you to deny God at all. Why? Because it's manifesting everywhere, in everything. The science of God is everywhere. It's not like a teapot that we have no idea is out there or not. There's no sign of the teapot really whether it's there or not. But we come to God, as Brother Harun mentioned, it's actually, there are many, not many, there are endless signs in everything without exception. No matter what you take it, you can take a water, or you can get a droplet of water, or you can get the particles in the water droplet. Whatever you look at it, actually, they will clearly and convincingly point to the existence of God. So in this case, that Russell's argument, that as if we don't have evidence, is absolutely false arguments. Therefore, Quran repeatedly refers us to explore the universe and says, this is the ayah for you. go and look at this ayah. This is the signs of Allah if you think, if you ponder, if you reflect. So in this case, basically, the essential part is to really see that. Now, why the science cannot see and why we can see that? So essentially, we need to look at what science could do. Remember at the beginning when we discussed Hawking? So do you think that science could answer what question, how question, or why question? What question? Yes. How about how question?
Yes, how?
Can science answer how question?
Yes.
Raise your hand if you think science can answer how questions. Raise your hand. Oh yeah, let's see. Okay. So, good. Yes. Okay. So majority, right? Isn't it? Majority of people think science can answer how questions. Actually,
The how question is kind of.
Actually, it is wrong. Science cannot answer how question as well.
They do answer it, but they give you the false information.
Yeah, so the science, so like I ask question. I say, what is this? Science can say, this is, name it, this is water. And say, what is water? It says consists of hydrogen and oxygen. Fine. But then I say, how we get water? Well, science says, you know, 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen come together, and something magically happen, and new thing emerge with the property which does not exist with the hydrogen nor with oxygen. Then I say, how this can happen? It says, you know, the wateriness of the water and the property of water is neither with hydrogen nor with oxygen. I say, well, you get this one? What is the answer? Oh, he says, this is emergent properties. Emergent properties basically is like, I call it hocus pocus properties. Like, really, that's what's like, you know, you get it from nowhere. What do you get? Where did you get this one? What did you get it? Like if I, you know, get this remote control and get this one, and then just mix them out and get a rabbit out of it, what would you say? Where did I get the rabbit? Oh, it's emergent property. When you mix them in a certain way, it just doesn't make sense. Yes?
But I can take oxygen and I can take hydrogen.
Yes.
And under a certain condition, I can create water.
Yes.
In the lab, I can do it.
Yes.
Right? So how?
No. Guess what? Then I will use. Yeah.
How much do you want?
Yeah. You can get hydrogen, you can oxygen under certain circumstances when they bring them together in a certain angle. With a certain angle to make it. Guess what? I will use. You know, actually, for our model, our favorite hero in Quran is Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. Yeah. I will use Abrahamic argument against that. I will say, when Prophet Ibrahim said with the Namrud, he says, what your God is doing, what could do, he said, my God gives life and give death. Yeah. And remember what he did? Namrud also bring those in prison, kill one and release the other. Yeah. What was the second thing Prophet Ibrahim said?
Bring the sun.
Oh, my God actually raised the sun from the east and set it in the west, do the reverse. That was the end of debate. I will say this. I will say, my God, create water out of hydrogen and oxygen. You go and create in any other way. Go and give me water in any other way you like. The debate will end. Because the way you talk about it is the way of God's creation in the universe. That creation is actually, according to Quran, is a set creation. It doesn't change. If you want to claim that you could do it as well, don't do it his way and go create in another way.
So I think the explanation rather is that what we're talking about is the sunnah of the Creator.
Yes.
That's what we're talking about, right? The sunnah, that everything, like for example, the sun rises from this and sets. It's not going to change.
This is the sunnah. The sunnah, what we call the sunnah, is the way of God's creation.
That's what I'm saying, right?
Yes.
So that's what you mean by that.
Exactly. So then if you, that's how I mean that, which means that when I say how the water is made, I mean that God creates water out of hydrogen and oxygen. That is, water does not come from hydrogen and oxygen. Comes directly from the power of God through the use of hydrogen and oxygen. This is the way He creates water. So water is the creation, it's not causation. It's not that hydrogen and oxygen come together and cause water. If this is the case, go and look at the property of hydrogen and oxygen. There has to be something can explain that property of water. It doesn't exist. One of the best book on that one is David Hume's books on the causation. David Hume was an atheist guy, and Professor Ismail know very well, I guess, on that. He made compelling argument that there is no way to justify causation. Because he says that what you see, let's say in the case of water, the property of water doesn't exist with hydrogen and oxygen. There is no way for you to say, he says what you see something happening again and again together, you actually confuse associating with causation. You start to associate water with the 2 hydrogen and oxygen, and you think 2 hydrogen and oxygen cause the water. So in other words, when you really look at it, there is in reality no causation, only association. The only cause is God. If every moment is directly caused by God, that means you can never explain it without God. The reason we say that science cannot answer the how question, because from Quranic perspective, God is the cause of everything, every moment. If I ask you how does this form, if God is directly involved and causing the water to be created, then you cannot explain the water without bringing God into the picture.
Besides the water example, can you give another example?
Anything you want. Let's say plants versus tree. Let's say the cells, whatever. Living beings is even much clearer that. Or even go and read, let's say, Wilczek's books on a beautiful question. It's amazing. He's a Nobel laureate in physics. He will tell you that when they put the particles in the subatomic world in an experiment, he says you put two particles, you get 4 particles as a result. Where the others come from, he says that this is emergent properties. And actually right now, if you go and look at the science, they say emergent properties everywhere, in everything. In the subatomic particles, in the food you eat, that turn to the living cells. And the food you eat, this water, 2/3 of my body is water. What happened? Does water go here and start to become thinking machine? What it has to do with the water? But that's how the brain is made of. The food you eat go and actually turn into some things has completely different properties. Where did you get this property? Nowhere. It's emergent, it's created property. I would rather to call it those emergent property to say created properties. This is a creation, it's not causation.
So the example right now, like for example, they're trying to get meat in the lab.
Oh yes, fine. That basically means that there are another way of the law of Allah that you could discover, you could make it, which means, you know, Allah could, as in the case of cloning as well. The question here is this: could you go and actually make the meat out of the atoms? That's the question. If you could make it, fine. But what they do, they go and get the cells there and have the cells, they find a way to feed the cell directly rather than feeding the animal. That's all. You feed the animals and the food go to the stomach, then go to the cell and they grow and then you get the meat. So they go and actually feed the cells, that's all. There is no creation there, there's nothing there. So they just discover an easy way, shortcut way to go to do that. There's no problem with that. Okay?
Yes. Sorry. Based on your explanation, and this is what I would say is my perspective on trying to say hydrogen and oxygen produces water. They've successfully removed God from the equation through the education, secularize our mind. Like you say, cows produce milk by eating grass. If a human being were to eat grass, will he produce milk? So making it simply, I mean, they try to make things very simple, simplistic meaning, and in doing that, they remove God from the equation, because for a cow to eat grass, or for a tree to take oxygen, right? To take carbon dioxide and produce oxygen, it's not so simple, but there's God in that equation, because again, it's sunnah. So I think, for me, I think what they've done is they've used science to remove God from education from the time we were in primary, nursery, and secondary school. Because the way you put it gives it context that these things are not possible. Even if you call it emerging properties. I think that's what I'm sensing.
That's exactly what we try to say. Our argument here is that the main problem in scientific explanation is science is all about the cause and effect. And in this case, the way the science explains, science provides the material cause as the real cause and leave no room for God. So in this case, that what we try to basically say, this does not make sense at all, that basically there is no real causation, there is only creation. At every stage, every moment with every property is completely created by God. So in this case, without God, you cannot explain anything, period. So therefore, God has to be in every subject that we want to learn. You can't just say this is chemistry, this is biology, let's understand without God. Okay? Now look at here, let me see, because I think we have very little time. So again, I want to go, so this is what, how, why question. So essentially, what is science? What is science? The study of change, right? But what does science try to understand the change? Through the cause and through the effect. So essentially, this is the science. Science says, look, there's a change, and the change is caused by this, right? But the effect is coming from the cause.
But then there's also a movement away from that. When you look at research and you look at the essence of research, I mean, when research first started, it was based scientifically. So something causes something, and then you get a product at the end. But even with research, and more now, they're relying on not just the positivist view of research, which is causation, looking at the other side of research. So qualitative research is now a growing field, which kind of stems from the quantitative research, but it's completely different, and it's gaining a lot of respect. But back then it wasn't. So that movement away from fact, cause, relation, it's more of, okay, there are different ways we can explain things. It doesn't need to be through cause. So when you're talking about this, and this runs through my head, as in research, and now research is moving more towards non-conventional ways for research, even beyond the qualitative and quantitative.
But that's about mainly human sciences. Still, physical science is very materialistic in a way that you explain everything to matter. Okay? So you cannot bring qualitative study in physics. You can't. So, and what they will explain, they will only say that some things, they name it as if they explain that, like emergent property or metamorphosis, but it doesn't really explain anything. Yeah. But in human science, you're right, but not in physical science yet. So again, look at here, the problem here, science, what is science? Is it descriptive or explanatory? Science is actually describing what is observed. Science can explain. Why? Because you cannot explain if you do not bring God into the picture. You can describe how the water is being created, but you cannot explain it if you do not attribute to creator. You can just, if you're honest, just say, I don't know how it's formed. I don't know. But calling emergent property is the way to really give an impression as if science can explain and not really letting you to go and explore for the answer. So my thing is that, okay, science can describe what is observed, but science should be honest and stop there. Let the religion and philosophy to go explain what is not explained through the observation. Okay? So, and that is against the problem with that. So essentially, when science started, for many centuries, it was Aristotelian. An Aristotelian idea that if you say how the table come into existence, Aristotle provides 4 causes. And Aristotle, I really consider him to be, I think you can call him the first scientist that we know in history, okay? So Aristotle says for the table to come into existence, you need to have the material cause, like the raw material, like wood and metals. Then you need to have the formal cause, which is the idea, the design. Then you need to have the efficient cause, which is someone with the mind can actually read this idea and get the material and put them together. But he says, even have all those 3, if you don't have the 4th one, the table can never come into existence. Why would you make a table? He says that if there is no telos, there will be no table. Which means that anything we see is made is always made for certain purpose. Which means that there is no single conscious human being who will do something for absolutely no reason.
You know, and this is an argument I use many times, right? Whenever I'm discussing, I'm like, everything in the room has a final cause, except for the human being. Because when you ask, what's the reason you were created, he says, I don't know, there's no reason.
Very
so
good.
I go look around in the room, show me one item in this room
Correct.
that does not have a final cause.
I think
it
very
will not
good.
exist.
Correct.
So how can you tell me that a human being that is actually instrumental in the efficient cause and the formal cause is existing without any final cause?
Very good point. Very good point. Guess what? In modern science, you're forbidden to even think about the formal cause. You're forbidden to even imply the telos. Your article will never get published. Okay? Because the idea is that if you mention that, that means you must have some belief. If you have belief, that means you're not a scientist. Okay? And how about the efficient cause? How about the formal cause? The formal cause is actually the information, the DNA. They think that's the formal cause. The efficient cause, again, they attribute those forces, the natural forces. They think the natural force, the energy, is sufficient to put those material together and form the universe. So therefore, they're trying to explain the whole universe through the three causes, not telos or the formal causes. But let's say, if you say, how? You know, you just seen an apple, and you say, well, we get an apple. The answer here,
Well, the problem with Aristotle is that he thought that the universe was eternal. So
yeah, but again,
those particular causes then don't apply. So you've got to introduce the necessary being within the chain of causation, right? So what you're saying is that God creates the cause and he creates the effect. So when God causes the cause, he creates the effect at the same time. That's what I think that you're saying. But for these causations to work, for the efficient causes to work, there's got to be a necessary being behind that particular causation, because then you can't run the causation.
Yeah, I agree. But again, I think it's the, in Aristotelian idea, that God of Aristotle, in my understanding, is the first cause. Yep. Okay? But he doesn't think that there could be universe without God as a first cause. But that's not God of Quran.
Yep.
But the point here, the other thing he makes in terms of really understanding the things, it to me is quite sound to say nothing could exist without the four causes. Okay? But whether those causes is just the first cause or constant cause, or the only cause in terms of God, that's something else, I think. That's why I thought it good to really look at. Now, let's say you want to teach, because one thing we do when we want to go through the workbooks, so essentially education is all about taking the kids and telling them everything about the existence, about themselves, about, the whole universe. So let's say you take them and you teach them about the plant, you teach them about seeds. So we look at like from the kindergarten to, let's say, 12th grade. Now, what we're doing actually, the very teaching of this concept, we don't referring Mother Nature and anything, is absolutely very materialistic. In a way that the teaching does not leave any room for God. Why? Because if I'm saying, where did you get apple? Oh, you get apple from apple tree. Where do you get apple tree? Oh, you get apple tree from apple seed. Where do you get apple seed? Oh, an apple seed, I don't know, sometime, emerge, and it's inside it has this information, and as soon as you put under, let's say, the soil and provide the right condition, it turned to the tree. Now, in that case, the only thing you could talk about it, that whether there was a God who started the process, that's all. There is no room for God at all. Why? Because science basically explains everything as if there's all just the cause and effect, and the only things you can debate about God is how did we get the first seed? That's all. Which means you can only bring the discussion of God as a first cause, not the cause of the system now, because you can explain. So again, the problem is the separation of creation from creator, as we mentioned this morning. So that's this connection we mentioned happened gradually. Start with Newton, we summarized the morning, and then Darwin did it with the life sciences, then John Locke did with the political sciences, then Adam Smith did with economic sciences, and then Freud did with human sciences. So again, you can see essentially that we disconnect everything from creator, and there is no room for creator. So, and why we need to talk about creator when we can explain everything. So essentially, this disconnection of the universe from God and misconnection with the nature, cause, and chance, that's what we see the root cause of the problem. Okay? So there is disconnection, and then there is misconnection. So now we attach everything, we explain everything to the material cause, we explain everything to nature, we explain everything to the cause or the mix of them. So that is the problem. So essentially, we mentioned initially you have your Abdullah, there you have a belief, and what happened, you cut the connection between Abd and Allah, and then you attach the Abd to nature, cause, and chance, and you make Abdu all, right? So because if you disconnect, creation from the creator, then essentially you have to, attribute to everything else that what you get it. So that's basically we describe as the problem that we face. So the root cause of it, when we look at it, we argue that it's come from the Christian Trinity, that we had, again, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And essentially, with the Enlightenment, they replaced that. So with the Newtonian physics and materialism, and against that, we mentioned it more, and therefore I go short. So materialism essentially, in a way to say, those rock-like particles, they are genius than professors. Because the particles essentially is like a rock, just small-scale rock, yani. So, and those rocks, they do some things. What they do is actually more amazing that, the best professor, because this is actually AI drawing for me, by the way. So I ask AI and I say, give me this, this rock professor, so that's the Professor Rockstar, So this is the universe, it's all matter. Therefore, even they say it doesn't matter, means that what really matters is matter. So nothing's beyond matter. So even you, I remember Nietzsche very famously says, he says, there's no human being. This is what we made it up. We are no different than the atoms out there, the rocks out there, but we call ourselves human being. We're just part of this universal soup of an electron and proton. We're going to turn back to them, but we're just deceiving ourselves and saying, we are human. He says there's no human. It's just men-made concept to define themselves different than others. And that's really what materialism will tell you. How would you say, let's say, your kids is better than the rocks out there? There's very difficult. It's very difficult to really explain the differences. So the secular Trinity, we say, instead of Father, they replace with Mother Nature. Instead of Son, they replace with material causation. And instead of the Holy Spirit, they replace with Holy Chance. So essentially, so it's those three things. We call it. We had it this session is actually with some graduate students, and there was one Catholic PhD student there. I presented, and I honestly said, it could be offending, and he came after that. He provided me more reason why the analogy is the right one. I thought that maybe it's offending that we shouldn't use, but he said this is actually from the Christian theology perspective. To have such an analogy make perfect sense, so I don't have time to explain, but it seems like, therefore I said, okay, that's fine, that I can use this analogy. So again, that's the pre-modern era, Christian Trinity, and that's the secular Trinity in modern and post-modern era that we do that. So essentially what they say, nature, Mother Nature, or nature is enough, and naturalism become the essential part. So finish with our example of water. I remember we start that. So essentially when I say, what is water? They say, water is made of hydrogen and oxygen. Hydrogen and oxygen causing the water, which is the causation, the sun. then I say, but there are certain things in water doesn't exist. How this come from how this come from that they say, oh, this is because of basically when they come together there's a reaction, and because of the nature of this hydrogen and oxygen that react with each other and then combine with it, you know, and create water. So that's kind of nature and nature law. And then when you say, but how come we get new properties would never exist with hydrogen and oxygen? Oh, they have to say it's really we're lucky. We're lucky that water has some unique properties. Like unlike on other fluid, when the water actually frozen, what happened? When it's frozen, it become lighter, less dense, and therefore it doesn't sink. If the ice sink, what will happen? Those animals in the lake, they're all gonna die. In the river, they're gonna die. Oh, but they are lucky. The water got a property, and actually the ice doesn't sink and become like a blanket and protect those, you know, those animals in the water. So how lucky they are. Again, they use to that. So essentially, we say to explain something to the causation. This is an analogy we use a lot. We say it's like when I come from a place, have no idea of the light, and I say, how did you get this light? You say it's easy. There's a light switch. So you turn it on, you get the light, you turn it off, the light disappears. Try it, you try, it works. You try again and again, you start to believe and come up with your light switch theory and say, oh, the light comes from the light switch. Is it true? No, it's false. But is there connection between the two?
There is.
For sure. So, but now if you say there's more than the light switch, there's a cable, there's a bulb, and the light comes out of all those three. Is that true?
No.
No, still not true. See? So in this case, we say basically, yes, there is a connection, but there is no causation. The light comes from the power station. The light does not come from the light switch. In other words, the light switch, the cable, the bulb, are the part of the system of delivering the light, the electricity to you. But they are not the source of it. Which means that when you study them individually or collectively, you should understand that they cannot be the source, as Dr. Yunus, I assume, explained it to you very well. So once you study and understand they cannot be the source, the question you ask, what is the source of the light? So the source of the light can only be something which can generate electricity, which is the power station. So the problem when you don't accept the source of light and ascribe to the light switch or the wire or the bulb, you fail to pay your utility bill, right? And you're called to be thief, right? Then you're stealing in this case. That's exactly what the science make the humanity to be. You don't recognize the source and you fail to pay the price and you live the life of a thief that would be unappreciative of the creation of the God. So again, so this is like oven and chef, and I think I'm going to finish. Same, the other analogy, we use remote control and TV. So same things. Remote control is connected to what you see on TV, but it's not the cause. There is association, but no causation out there. Okay? So in a sense that basically, so the whole point is that I think we can stop it here because, are we time-wise? We're over, right, the time? Because we had 1 hour. Yeah, I think we can end it here. What we're going to do, how much break we're going to give now? Is there a break? Huh?
I think this time everyone grabs the tea and comes and sits back down.
Okay, okay. So what we're going to do basically, Sister Usma is going to make a presentation, show you the textbook example of what we discussed, right? In terms of how you can identify this virus in a textbooks in terms of the embedded secular ideology, okay? So we can end it here. So help yourself, get your tea, inshallah, we'll continue with your presentation. Thank you.